joining me. I've got my friend here, Angus Robertson from Chief Outsiders. He's a partner in Fractional CMO, and I'm really excited to dig into his expertise in SaaS and some of these emerging markets that he's involved in. Angus, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Valerie. Great to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you tell a little bit of background about your expertise and your angle in the fractional CMO role, just from your expertise and your background there. It's a little unique and a little specialized just based on your background. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and share that with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm with Chief Outsiders and I'm one of 100 fractional CMOs. And we span across B2B, B2C, and a number of different disciplines on the marketing side and a number of different industries. For me specifically, it's very much B2B SaaS. I've clearly found out that that's where I live. And over a little more than 20 years of operational marketing, I've spent most of my time in product marketing and then SaaS demand gen. But B2B SaaS is my world.
Your bread and butter.
Yep.
Well, and SaaS is in hot demand. I mean, it's one of those areas in just tech and business at large that I feel like is there's a new SaaS company popping up left and right, and really great resources and problems that SaaS companies are solving. So, how have you seen marketing shift from when you first started working in SaaS to where we are today? Have you seen a big shift in things?
Yeah, it's interesting. When it comes to SaaS, I think my understanding and my ability to run a marketing playbook for SaaS has improved. But I think a lot of the fundamentals are still there. This idea of product-led growth and the amazing LTV and CAC that you can achieve, and recurring revenue with these gross margins that are over 70%. So I think one of the big areas I think is so important that a lot of companies don't focus on and still struggle to focus on is getting that product market fit and go-to-market model right, even for a SaaS business, because if marketing doesn't have that air cover and that understanding on the product market fit bets and ICP, and then also the go-to-market model, then you end up just running around doing a lot of different tactical things. I think to answer your question specifically, one thing that has dramatically changed has been just the shift to digital. So I think about all the outbound activities folks can do with phone and email, and then of course, all the events, et cetera. But the shift from those events and outbound type activities to inbound has only accelerated over the past 2 years. It's a lot more competitive in that space too.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about this before I hit record, but my husband works in SaaS, and so I've seen him from more of the BI operational data side of things, and the conversations he's having with the marketing teams. But I also have observed before COVID hit, he had a local job. It was a local SaaS company, and he could work from home if there was a snowstorm or,
right, some
weird thing going on. But now his job is 100% remote, and they're now dealing with these remote teams. I'm curious to see from your perspective on the marketing side, how have you seen SaaS companies shifting and pivoting, using that coined word pivot, but how have you seen things change from your end of things as from the marketing end of the SaaS company operations?
I'm embarrassed to admit I was somewhat old school in my mindset and how I looked at things. So when the pandemic first hit, I was looking after sales, marketing, customer success for about 50 people. And I felt pretty strongly about having folks in the office and just that ability to work together, that energy, that ability to collaborate. Mm-hmm. But then we all started working remotely, and our productivity actually went up So I pretty quickly changed my mindset, and we do regular stand-ups as part of a agile go-to-market, and that was really effective. I think now my mindset shifted a little bit again, and I do think remote first organizations can work. In fact, I do believe they're more competitive.
Mhm.
But I do think also having some kind of face-to-face connection every once in a while is valuable, just for building culture and that sense of team. It's really interesting. I was a fractional VP of demand gen for a fairly large company, about $500 million in revenue for 9 months. And I met them once. I was remote the whole time and I met them once. And it was after about 6 months that I first met everybody. And it's a really strange feeling meeting people face to face, because you
Yeah.
don't have I mean, you recognize everybody right away, but the sense of dimension and how tall people are and just the energy they give off, you don't, it's just, there's a big difference. And it's
Yeah.
fun to connect to that way and go have a coffee with somebody and, get in a car and drive somewhere. It's just a different kind of experience. And so I saw the immediate productivity gains from being completely remote, but then became later valued that face-to-face interaction at some level.
Yeah. Have you seen a huge shift in how you are adjusting your marketing strategy because of what's happened over the last few years with COVID? Has that changed anything for you all?
Yeah, it's interesting because tech are always early adopters for um, new ideas or technologies or approaches. But with the pandemic, we saw these wholesale shifts. I like to think of myself as an early adopter, but I'm really part of the early majority. And I didn't order groceries online before and didn't use telemedicine before, but now it's become pretty standard and pretty comfortable. So we've seen one of my clients sells into the world of K through 12, who can be fairly traditional in what they like to do, but through the pandemic, they had to start using remote classrooms and a lot of tech and that sort of thing. So I think across the board, we're seeing dramatic changes. And just the idea that it's possible and that it works and the economy doesn't break and work doesn't break
Right.
is a pretty big shift. And just this idea of autonomy, that you can work wherever you want to work. And as a management team at a company, that if you hire somebody anywhere in the US or anywhere in the world, you can potentially get better talent that's more motivated. That's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing that I've seen, because going back to my husband, I saw him, he switched jobs halfway through the pandemic. And it was one of those things where, a SaaS company in Illinois, for example, is now competing against the SaaS companies in San Francisco
Right,
or New
right.
York, where there's the salaries are potentially higher, the competition is a little bit more fierce. And so some of these other locations, you have the ability to go after talent from anywhere, but that also means that you have to potentially up level, your game and some of your standards. But it does open up more possibilities, I think, for SaaS companies. So, and I loved what you said too about just like the opportunity that it gave of just the pandemic proved that a lot of this was possible, that it didn't break the economy, that our customers can get used to some of this digital adoption that they might have been dragging their heels on before. That's a really interesting observation.
A lady I have partnered with, she said something interesting, another perspective. She said it's less about the great resignation and more about the great talent exchange.
Yes.
People are going somewhere. Yeah.
People are, yeah, they're not, well, I mean, there are some people
Just completely
retiring.
checked out. I'm done.
Yeah, there's a lot of those kinds of folks.
Yeah.
My parents' generation is largely part of that. But there is a huge wave of just for people that are staying in the workforce.
Yeah.
It's not like they're just checking out and couch surfing and
Right.
riding the unemployment train. They're moving around, and they're really moving to better opportunity, different change of culture, different change of pace. There's so many different reasons, but yeah, it's the last couple of years have been a giant social experiment for sure.
Right.
It's definitely been an interesting time to be alive.
Yeah.
So, well, that's great. So I'm curious, what really pushed you into getting into the fractional CMO route versus staying in a more traditional marketing route? And what are some of the things that you enjoy about this fractional perspective?
Someone I worked with some time ago, he's now a partner at Bain. I asked him his advice because I had a couple of different paths I could go.
Mm-hmm.
And he said over his career, he's made this observation that you get known first for your industry, and then you might get known for particular projects or set of expertise. But then as you develop your career, it becomes about the network. And I had never done consulting. And last year I worked with more than 10 different companies and 10 different CEOs. And I worked with 100 different CMOs at Chief Outsiders. So, I mean, I was at a company in telecom, a B2B tech company, for a long time, more than 10 years, 14 years. And then I was at 3 B2B SaaS startups over 6 years. But then I worked with more than 10 companies in 1 year. And just the amount of learning and exposure to ideas and approaches and people is that much greater. So that's what's been interesting about being a consultant, just that exposure to all those different companies and ideas.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I know I'm in a similar type of position where I work with multiple clients. And so for me, I just love getting the variety.
Yeah.
I can kind of dabble in their product and their message, if you will. And then I can shift gears. And so for somebody like me who just loves to learn, it's really fun for me to kind of learn and extract what the public is going to care about or what their customer is going to care about. But I don't have to live in that space 100% every single day. And so for me, I was a little surprised that I would enjoy some of the variety so much. But when you're working with a few clients like you do, you kind of get that change. And you also work, I'm sure, with a ton of different personalities, ton of different types of people. And that's always a fun thing. It just expands your circle that much more.
Yeah. And to your point, it's really interesting to see what's the same and what's different, and being able to
For sure
put a bit of a pattern together, and that makes you that much more valuable to help another client.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you have all of these experiences and, things that work with this SaaS company. So then when you start working with another one where maybe the product is different,
Yeah.
but the sales process and the marketing communications around it is just very parallel. You can say, look, like, I know this works here. It's an easy parallel to put it on, in place for another client. So, that's one of the benefits. A lot of times people might think, well, gosh, like, a company, wouldn't you want to have a permanent CMO? But there are some major benefits to having somebody like you who has that deep knowledge, but you also have the experience with multiple different scenarios that you wouldn't get with just somebody who's entrenched in just your product. So I'm curious, for you, like when it comes to like getting a win in marketing, what are some things that you're seeing are really some foundational basics that have helped you and your clients get those really good marketing wins?
Yeah. At a high level, I think about pretty much the same things. I like to think about outcome marketing. So if you have a set of activities in a certain sequence that you're going to yield certain results. And that's always possible to a lesser or greater extent. And within that, I think about three elements: product market fit, campaigns, which is really content and channels, and then an agile approach, which incorporates test and iteration, but also the metrics to see how you're doing. And bringing all those together will make the difference. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that the sales is happy and the management's happy and the board's happy. And for that to happen, you need that level of pipeline contribution. But once you have that pipeline contribution there, then you have a lot of air cover. There's a lot that marketing can do. So it's always a fun place to get to, because then you can focus a lot more on awareness or being really innovative with your campaigns or how you engage your personas and markets or building out a community. So I really look at sort of this standard approach, and then the maturity of the organization I'm working with. Are they completely unknown in their market, or are they really known in the market? And then from a product market fit standpoint, there's a few tactics that really make a difference. That is, are there some macro shifts happening that you can take advantage of? And are there some partnerships you can take advantage of? Just with everything going on this spike in energy costs, I was just considering Tesla again. I was in the Bay Area, and a friend of mine bought his first Tesla in 2014.
Yeah.
And his car is 7 years old now, and he's still using the same battery pack. And it costs him very little to run that car. Whereas for a typical commuter, it could be $800 a month in gas.
Right.
But there was two macro trends that Tesla was focused on. One is just the shift in regulatory and social desires around being better for the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then also this technology shift. So self-driving, eco-friendly cars that are actually interesting and exciting to drive. I mean, that's sort of amazing what they've been able to do. And they're spending a lot more on R&D than their competitors, and a lot less on marketing, because they're doing something new that aligns to these market shifts, and they can leverage word of mouth because they're aligned to these market shifts and this innovation related to that shift.
Yeah, it's like they're doing something worth talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I've had so many, I can recollect so many conversations just around the dinner table or in a car or whatever, getting picked up at the airport, where my husband was just geeking out over Tesla. So, as you're talking about this, I'm like, oh, I can very clearly picture those conversations where they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to put up a billboard. They didn't have to send me an email campaign. They didn't have to do anything, but they're just doing something worth talking about. And it's getting people, those grassroots conversations are naturally happening. And then you have, these major waves of, I'm so curious right now, just watching Musk buying Twitter, and, what's the bigger play there? But as we're talking, I'm wondering, well, gosh, like, people are talking about Elon Musk, and then they're going to start talking about Tesla, and then they're going to start talking about all of his other ventures. There's a trickle down effect that, Twitter may not be the end game for him. It might be just a one little piece in the puzzle for him, where, hey, people are paying attention to Tesla more now because of Twitter. It's such an interesting dynamic that's happening. So, but yeah, it's so important to think. I love what you were talking about, of just getting back to like some of those questions of like, where is somebody at in the stage as far as their business goes? Do people know them? Where they are in business is definitely going to affect what their marketing strategy is going to need to be, and how much effort goes towards one piece of the pie versus another. So I love that that's kind of where you're starting from with a lot of these conversations with clients. I'm curious, like when you have had a situation where maybe you guys didn't get the win you were hoping for, how do you respond to that? How, because with any type of business, SaaS or otherwise, there are going to be quarters where things are lower than you expected, or campaigns don't go as planned. I'm curious, how have you seen the response, and what has been your approach when you haven't gotten the win that you were hoping for?
It does depend on your stakeholders. So sales and CEO and management and the board are generally the major stakeholders. And if you're not sort of the permission to play or the and ability just to be there to participate, that pipeline number needs to be at a certain level. And for SaaS companies, those SaaS companies that want to reach 100, I've generally focused on the SaaS companies that are in that growth stage. So getting to 100 million in revenue and that $1 billion valuation. Although now we're talking about some SaaS companies with 35x revenue type valuations.
Wow.
10x was impressive not too long ago. But when that pipeline number isn't there, it's interesting, because there's there's the number that the bank has, that the PE or VC has, that the management team has, that sales has, and then that marketing has, right? So the number you have and sales have are always going to be tougher, and an individual rep's going to be the hardest off. So being able to understand that landscape, I think, is important. And fundamentally, I feel that there needs to be alignment on the strategy and the drivers. So if a company has a vision to get to this future state over a number of years, and then there's a financial and strategic plan to support that, what's marketing's role in that? And does the management team and the board agree with marketing's role to support that business driver? So that's really critical, and it's hard to get to that point. And then if we're not hitting the number of meetings or the amount of pipeline that needs to be achieved that quarter, or in that 6-month period, the question is it because there's something fundamentally wrong with our strategy because we didn't get it right, or there's been a shift in the market? Or is it just one of those things that needs to play out? You're doing the right activities relative to the strategy, you're building the right infrastructure out, it's taking a bit longer, or you put something out of sequence. So that's generally the approach I take. I want to understand what the number really needs to be, and then relative to the strategy, are we doing the things that we need to do, or do we need to make a shift because we either got the strategy not quite right, or there's been a change in our market?
Yeah, I love what you kind of ended on just there of, sometimes you're doing the right activities, it's just taking longer than you expected, or, there's something else going on in the world that where, you couldn't have predicted it, but you're affected by something that was out of your control. We've seen that clearly with COVID, where, a lot of businesses probably had a great strategy moving forward, and then COVID hits and that strategy is completely wiped out. We've had that happen all over history, right? It happens all the time. COVID was just one of those like clear in your face examples that we all have known and experienced now. But I just love that distinction, because a lot of times I think people are quick to scrap really great marketing campaigns, materials, activities, simply because it's taking too long, or maybe it's in the wrong order, or maybe you're missing like one little piece that needs to be inserted in. And so, it's a lot of work goes into building up these campaigns and these strategies. To just sit and scrap it is not always the right move. But you and I both have probably seen this happen more times than we would care to count, where great ideas just get thrown out the window because it's not moving fast enough or at the right time. So I love that you brought that all up.
Yeah, SaaS companies can be impatient, and if the product market fits right, but
I think it's more than just SaaS companies.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
But yeah, you
But to
probably
your point,
more than you can count.
okay. But as you said, putting that infrastructure in place, if you're a company that is all of a sudden activating or turning on marketing, but you don't have a CRM, you don't have any people, you don't know what conversations you want to own in the market, you don't have any campaigns, you don't have your channels turned on, you don't know what channels are going to work, that can take a little time to get established. And there's some trial and error as you find the sweet spot.
Yeah, where you figure out what your message really needs to be, who you make sure you're talking to the right people, saying the right things. Yeah, there's definitely that learning phase. And from my experience, SaaS companies, they like to move fast. They are often impatient about things. So sometimes that learning has to happen as you're moving and adjusting, and sometimes that moves a little bit faster than maybe what it should. I don't know. At least that's from what I've observed. So, but as we're talking to just in general marketing, we've going after quick wins, simple wins. If you were to give somebody your brand advice about if they want to make a simple win in their marketing, they want to move the needle just a little bit, something that is tried and true, or something right now that's just trending that is going to help them move the needle, what advice would you give somebody? What advice would you give a marketing team or another fractional CMO working in SaaS or otherwise? What's going to move the needle?
Can I give you two?
You can give me as many as you want.
All right. You made me think of two. One is something that I was introduced to when I came to Chief Outsiders that I've continued to work on and refine. And I'm now able to do it in just one sheet, but it's pretty much anybody can do it. And that's a digital marketing assessment. So you can use a tool like an SEMrush, and you compare yourself with 3 of your competitors and look at 3 things. Your positioning, and you can just look at the above the fold value props on the 4 websites, and are you overcoming generic self-concept or not? And then the second thing is just the SEO keyword ranking, which, by the way, will tell you what the content strategy is and how effective that is. And then thirdly, are they running PPC? And if they are, what are they getting traction with? And that will illustrate what the campaign strategy is. So very quickly, you get a landscape of your market category and a sense of what's working, what's not working for you relative to your competitors, and where you might be able to navigate some opportunities there. The second is a trend that I've thankfully seen taking off, and I'm learning about it too, and that's just more of an emphasis on customer journey mapping. So for so long, especially in SaaS, it's all about new logos, new logos, new logos. But if you really understand the stages that the prospect and the customer go through over their entire life cycle with you, what those touch points are, what the activities are with those touch points, and who the owners are and what the expected experience should be, and then segment your customers relative to ICP and non-ICP and their levels of adoption, you can absolutely improve the customer experience and improve your ability to do referrals. At the end of the day, that's such a scalable way to achieving growth. And it's, as you were saying earlier, a lot of companies want that quick fix and it's all about the new logos. But if you don't have your customers out there championing for you, that's only going to get you so far, because you're going to have churn.
Yeah. Well, it's, first of all, I love both of those tangible takeaways. So thank you.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a lot of times people are always thinking about that new client to come in the door, new customer, and they don't realize the opportunity that exists to upsell existing customers or to just retain them, plain and simple. Just the lifetime value of that customer could be, and usually is, way more than if you're constantly churning through new people, and the amount of work and effort that goes into getting that new customer versus keeping. It's really powerful. So, but it's not always the fun conversation, because then you have to get into things like, customer support and, why are people not staying and what's making them stay versus not stay. And you kind of have to, you get a little bit under the hood, a little bit on maybe some other problems in the organization. And sometimes it's easier to focus on, let's just get new people in the door.
Exactly. But I do see that shifting. More and more people are thinking, more executives and companies are prioritizing that, which is reassuring. I don't think it's reached a tipping point yet, but yeah.
That's wonderful. That's great. Well, and thank you so much for sharing both of those actionable tips. To your first tip, I actually had a conversation just yesterday, and they weren't a SaaS company. They were a local mom and pop type of local service provider. And we went to Google. Google was where we started to take a look at where the sources of their problems might be and what keywords essentially are worth focusing on.
Yeah.
It's amazing how just that simple search engine is such a powerful tool in informing content strategy. And when you pair it with something like SEMrush or others, you can really get some deep insights. But sometimes just hitting that google.com, you can get some great insights. So I love that. Yeah. Thanks for sharing both of those two very actionable things to get some good wins. So we'll make sure to link over to everywhere people can find you online in the show notes, but they can also find more from you at chiefoutsiders.com. And I know you're pretty active there over on LinkedIn. So any parting words of advice for our listeners as they are out making waves in the marketing world?
If you're a CEO or an executive on the management team, to make your marketing team's life just a little bit easier, think about those bets, those use cases and those markets that are going to make or break the success of your business, and get alignment with your marketing team, and you'll see just that much more performance out of them.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, there you have it. Angus Robertson from Chief Outsiders, sharing all of his amazing wisdom as a fractional CMO. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Valerie. It was fun.
If you liked what you just heard, please hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes. And while you're at it, go ahead and leave us a review. That not only helps us out, but it helps others discover great interviews just like this one.